thank you for being here with us. And thank you, Aisha Al-Muslim. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me.
So once again, I'm Aisha Al-Muslim. I am the senior editor of Newsroom internships at the Wall Street Journal. That just means I oversee the internship program. So she talked about me being on a tour of Europe, and I need to add a little more context to that. So the initial reason why I was coming out to Europe is because I wanted to see the Backstreet Boys. They're gonna be out here, right? So I was planning to make a vacation out of this. And it's also my mother's birthday next week, so she's actually back in the hotel waiting on me. But so I figured, make it a trip. And then when I told one of my bosses that I was coming to Europe, she's like, well, maybe you should visit some of the bureaus we have there. And I was like, that's not a bad idea. I could visit some universities. So it's a work trip, fun trip, everything in between. I just came this morning from Barcelona. I saw the Backstreet Boys last night in Barcelona. So, and I'll be seeing them tomorrow night here in Paris. So. Yes, again, I'm going to see them in Amsterdam and also Berlin. I said I was making a tour. So I'm a real fan. So I just wanted to, just so you know, a little quirkiness about me, why I'm here. So I'll start off telling you a little bit more about my career, how I got here to this job. And then I'll go over some of the points of the internship. I know some of you probably already looked at the website, which is great. I just like to go over some things to clarify. I think it's helpful. If you have a question, and then at that point when I get to the presentation about something that I just said, feel free to raise your hand and I'll be happy to answer it. If you have a question about something else, just hold it to the end and I'm happy to take all your questions, okay? Please do let me know if I'm speaking too fast. I know not everybody's a native language speaker, English natives. Anyway, between my New York accent and my Spanish accent, sometimes I speak fast. So I try to slow down a little bit. So again, Aisha, I was born in Panama, which is in Central America. So my first language is Spanish. I moved to the United States when I was almost 11 years old. I started the 6th grade there, learned English while I was in the United States. By the 7th grade, I had a journalism class. We had a school newspaper, and I fell in love with journalism. My very first article, would you guess what it was about? It was about the Backstreet Boys. It was like an album review. They were putting out the first CD in the US, and I wrote about it. So that's how, what got me into journalism, essentially. So I continued knowing that I wanted to be a journalist. So I went to high school where we had a journalism program. And I was when I went to college, I went to Lehman College, which is part of the City University of New York, so CUNY is what we call it. And then I attended the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. That's where I got my master's degree. And after I graduated from school, university, I know over here, everything's school is, in Americans, we say everything's school. But after I graduated, my first job was at a community newspaper. And it covered Queens, so it's called the Queens Courier, Queens in New York. And I was writing for the English language paper, and I was also a reporter for the Spanish language paper and the editor of their Spanish language paper, which was, it came out every 2 weeks. So I had to do a role. It was interesting to do that, especially out of school, to be able to use my native language and then obviously English. Then a little less than a year after that, I went to Newsday, which is a daily newspaper out on Long Island in New York. I spent a total of 7 years there. First, I started as a 2-year reporter intern, which basically meant that I was a reporter getting paid less. But it was a good experience, obviously. I actually loved working there. So before my 2 years were up, they decided to hire me, and I became a staff reporter at that point. I was covering the town of Hempstead, which is a township on Long Island, with like 800,000 people. And at one point, I guess at the 3-year mark, I had an editor ask me, okay, what else do you want to do? You've been covering this town for 3 years. And I was like, I'm supposed to do something else. I really love what I'm doing. So I started to think about like, what else would I do? And the right opportunity came along, and there was an opening on the business desk for a reporter to cover retail and small businesses. So I said, you know what, let me go for it. At the time, I used to work Thanksgiving. You guys know Thanksgiving in the US. I'm Panamanian, so we don't celebrate Thanksgiving. It's an American holiday. So I would always work Thanksgiving and get some extra money, obviously. So I was covering a lot of Black Friday, stores, shopping, all those things, that the craziness that was happening then. So I had a lot of clips covering retail that way. And then again, I was a town reporter, so I got some clips covering small businesses within the town and didn't even realize that that's what I was doing. So the business editor at the time essentially took a chance on me because I was not a business reporter. But he felt that, given my work ethic and people being able to vouch for my work, that I could make the transition. So I became a business reporter at that point, which obviously ultimately led me to the Wall Street Journal. So I spent 3.5 years at Newsday as a business reporter. And then I went to a job fair for the National Association of Black Journalists, obviously in the US. And I ended up meeting the editor, the person who became my direct editor at the job fair. So I got a job working as a breaking business news reporter. And so I was covering things like earnings, company earnings, mergers and acquisitions, leadership changes. It was tough. Initially, I had been a reporter for a few years, but it was tough, I won't lie. It was fast-paced, writing stories, 5-10 minutes, trying to write, a graph or two and get the numbers right and put it out and all that. But it was fun, and at the same time, I learned a lot. I became a better reporter, business reporter. I also was covering as a mini beat, so a mini coverage area, the business of travel and tourism. And it had made sense at the time because clearly I love to travel, so I was all over the place. So I would write about the hotel companies, the cruise lines, like the booking.com and things like that. And then after that, I remember I told you I was covering retail. I really had liked that. But I learned a lot about bankruptcies because a lot of retailers were filing for bankruptcies and closing stores or supermarkets and things like that. So I wrote a lot about bankruptcy. So ultimately, I ended up getting a job at the Journal covering bankruptcy, and I became a bankruptcy reporter. A lot of what I covered was retail, but there was also other things that involve retail, like logistics, so like the transportation companies, the trucks and things like that. Real estate, commercial real estate. And so I covered, other types of companies too that were in financial distress, but, predominantly was more retail focused. So that's really when I started working on getting scoops, which is a big thing at the Journal, trying to get scoops, being the first to report on something. And I would do a lot of like enterprise work where I knew like a general audience would be interested in, because when I was on the bankruptcy team, we had a vertical called WSJ Pro. So that means financial professionals paid extra. Now, it wasn't the normal WSJ subscription. They paid extra just to read our work. But I also wanted the general audience to read what I wrote. So that meant I was focusing on a lot of things that I knew that a general audience would want to read. And so oftentimes I would make it in the actual journal, in the paper. And so, yeah, that was the last job that I had before this one. This job I started last year, June. I started 2 weeks before the summer interns last year started. And so we were all learning together. But I had been at the Journal for a few years already, so it wasn't like I was totally starting from scratch. But for me, one of the reasons that I decided to make the switch, because I'm not a reporter anymore, I still consider myself a journalist, is that I really enjoy mentorship and I really enjoy talking to students. I used to do that as a reporter on my own time all the time. Remember I said I went to high school also for journalism. I often go back still to my high school and talk to the journalism students there. I think, doing that is important. So this just naturally aligned with my passion to help the next generation, whether it's getting hired, getting educated, or just having an opportunity to do something else. So that's a little bit about me. So I'll go into the presentation. And again, later on, if you want to ask me anything else about my career or journalism in general, you can. I just go into this to get it out of the way, and then I'll take your questions, okay? So I don't want to scare you because I feel like I've scared a few students already with this, but shouldn't be a surprise that our internship is very competitive, right? So being that we're very competitive, it is essential that you listen to what I'm about to say because you're getting an inside look as to how I think and how we think at the Journal that others may not get that opportunity to have, okay? So really think about that. We usually select about a total of 30 interns. That's obviously in general, including the US. Most of the internships are in the US. For next summer, we plan to have about 3 spots in Europe. Okay, so that means it's, Europe, obviously our bureaus are a lot smaller. The US, New York is our main hub. So it makes sense, but I just want you to know that is the case, okay? So a little bit more about our program, obviously, so besides the hand-on experience, because you're not fetching coffee for anyone, like if you're working for us, you're like a staff reporter or a staff photo editor, or whatever it is. So aside from that, you also get training. Training is an essential part of the internship program. And that doesn't mean like all day training, like, we'll focus like probably like an hour for like the first 2 weeks of a new topic, whether it's writing an A-head, which is, the funny, quirky front page story, or whether it's how to get scoops, right? Or whether it's learning about our standards and ethics. And that is like a training that everybody at the Journal has to go through. So you get an inside look of how we think and why we publish what we publish or why we don't publish what we publish. So the other thing is that every intern gets paired with a mentor. And that is someone within the newsroom who has volunteered to be a mentor. So that really means they want to do it, right? Which is great. I find that all the interns tend to be really grateful to have that other person to turn to for advice, whether it's career advice or just how to navigate the newsroom or bouncing ideas off of them, right? Or just like, I have this issue, what should I do? That is, the mentor is meant to be that. And they're not on the same team. So they're on a different team so that people feel comfortable going to their mentors with pretty much whatever they need. I also check in with every intern like throughout the internship, so it's not like they're totally alone or anything like that. We also have sessions for the interns where they get to know each other, also where they're introduced to other people in the newsroom. So like we have like panels, and that's separate from like the training sessions. So we just keep that going throughout the internship so that you're basically always checking in to see how things are going with everyone else. Well, you're all masters, right? Everybody's a master, so master students, great. So that's great. So that means you qualify. If you, one thing you should know is that, let's say you apply for next summer and you graduate next year, you could still apply for the year after that. You still qualify 1 year after graduation. And so right now the application process is not open for Europe, but it will be. And that would open November 4th, and it'll close January 3rd. Also, obviously, we pay our interns, so $900 a week U.S. equivalent, whatever it will be here, the equivalent of that. And we're actually talking about increasing that pay for next summer. So if you get chosen, obviously you'll know if we increased it, but that is the plan as of right now. And the other thing I would say, when you're applying for the internship, some of you are allowed, meaning you have authorization to work in the U.S. Either you're from there or something, and others, obviously you could technically apply to the U.S. and you could apply to Europe. That is fine. As long as you're authorized to work in the U.S. or in Europe, you can apply to the internship. We will not sponsor any visas though, so just keep that in mind, okay? So just quickly just going over some of what we require. Resume, cover letter, no more than 5 clips, published clips, that's a big one. So if you did something just for class and it was just you and your professor who saw it, that does not count as published, right? The public has to be able to see it somehow. We also don't count self-published work. So let's say you had a medium.com page or something and you just published it yourself, that doesn't count. If you have something like through school or your internship or someplace else that then it was published, then that counts as published for us, okay? I just want to clarify that because I get that question often. We also require that you have either a previous newsroom internship or that you did really great work at some kind of school publication or as a freelancer. That also counts. Again, that means we're really putting our emphasis on seeing your published work. Like, what did you publish? Whether it's in print, TV, whatever it is. We want to see what you published, okay?
In a lot of newsroom internships, when you get to publish something, you don't do it alone. You do it with either a team or it rarely happens that it's just your article that, like, with your name. Does that count as well? Like, if you
Yeah, can you, I'm trying to understand your question, so go ahead.
What I mean is that some articles that you will write in a newsroom internship will happen with a team. So in the end, it will say your name and maybe 1 or 2.
Oh, okay, you have various bylines is what you're saying. Okay.
Does that count as your clip as well? Or
Okay, so she's asking whether publishing an article with various bylines count as a published clip to submit to the application. Yes, it does count. In that case, what you need to do is have like a paragraph that really say what your role was in that, because I won't know, or whoever's reading it, really it's mostly me, I won't know what your role was. So tell me like what you did for it that explains your role with that. That's gonna be important, especially if it's a group situation. It's fine to include group clips, but I would say steer away from everything being a group clip because then it's hard to tell your own work. And we want to be able to assess that. So it's fine to have a mix, and that include, including that, but don't solely depend on that, is what I would say. Yeah.
I was just wondering, so if you have published, but it's not related to sort of business/financial background, how much is that important that it should be related to the subject?
Yeah, great question. So it doesn't have to be about business or finance. The internship is not only business or finance. There are different types of beats, so that's fine. What's important is that you include your best work. We want to see how you write, how you think, how you choose stories, like your news judgment, right? That is what's going to be important, not necessarily the beat. Now, if you're very interested in one specific beat and you happen to have clips in that, that's fine. It just shows us you're really interested in that. But we've had interns that don't know any business or finance, but we know they were good journalists in general and could apply those same skills to a new beat that they don't know. So that's fine.
I have a question. If you did internships, for example, in Paris, should you translate the articles and make them in English?
Great question. Yeah. So should you translate articles? Yes. If the articles are not in English, please translate them. We only allow translations for the Europe internships. If it's in the US, we need it in English. that's the distinction of how we have the requirements are a little bit different in that regard. So yes, if you have it in another language, please translate it. No problem.
So, Wall Street Journal has different bureaus, like Middle East, for example. I was wondering, is it also possible to get internships in different bureaus, or like in a particular like Middle East?
Okay. Is it possible to get other assigned to other bureaus, like in the Middle East, for example, is what you're asking? So, no, in that we won't assign any intern to the Middle East because we wouldn't want to put them in danger. That's one. Two, we don't have enough people there. Usually we either have freelancers or they're not necessarily based in an office. So our focus for here is the US, Europe, so Brussels, London, Paris, Berlin, and then Asia. We have like Tokyo and Singapore and Beijing. That is where we place interns, but no Middle East, unfortunately, no. Yeah.
One more question. So, like during the internship, what is the content exactly? Like, are we going to focus on covering the finance, or like finance related stories more frequently, or maybe like other stories, like as I said, like Middle Eastern, etc., like different subjects as well.
Yeah, so you can cover different subjects. So business and finance and markets can be one of them, but we also have politics, for example. We also have just world news. There's energy. So there are different types of beats that are open. When the application goes live, it will say exactly what kind of beats you could potentially cover. So when you write your cover letter, you will say what beats you're interested in, because that is something that we consider, and we do try to place interns in the areas of interest that they have. Another one that we're considering doing, at least including, is going to be video editing. So being on the video team in London specifically. So if you're interested in video, London, that would be an opportunity there.
So I'm really interested in the Asia Pacific internships. Could you elaborate on them?
Asia Pacific?
Yeah, and if there are any like specific language requirements.
Well, the biggest thing is, are you already authorized to work there? Because again, we're not sponsoring any visa. So if the answer is no, then you can't apply to that. Okay. So as far as in general language requirements for us, especially when it's for us considered international internship, it is helpful to have another language that you know. And obviously it's helpful to have the language. So example, if you're interested in Berlin, to know German to be in Berlin makes sense. To know French in Paris makes sense, like that. So that's how we'll also think about when we're choosing interns, to see what language skills they have that makes sense there. Obviously, it's a competition, right? So if it happens that the pool, for some reason, maybe there aren't that many German speakers, then all of a sudden that may give you another chance if you're not a German speaker. But we do take those things into account.
I had a question regarding like all of the work that I've done before has been video focused, but like is it okay if I use those as clips because they're all a very different format than like print journalism?
Okay, so all the clips that you've had have been video focused, and you want to know whether that counts. It can count. I would say that if you have a script that you can turn in so we could see what your writing is like, if you really want to do writing. Otherwise, like I said, we do have that video editing potential spot in London. So, yeah.
I was wondering I took a look at your interns list from last year and when they published, and also what their journey had been like. And I was wondering, for example, for places such as Brussels, are you looking for somebody who has potentially prior expertise in European affairs, or is that something we don't need to have in order to get an internship there? Like if we have it, should we talk about it, or do you prefer people who have other sorts of more varied experience? Because I feel like your interns last year had a lot of like different
specializations, different journeys, sometimes very not even that much related to journalism experience. They have other experiences that counted. What are you looking for in that regard?
Yes, so I actually didn't finish my presentation, so you kind of get me back on track here. Yeah, you were asking in regards to the type of skills that that may be beyond journalism. Well, okay, so that's actually one of the things that I normally talk about transferable skills. It may not be journalism related, but it will be useful in journalism. So what you were mentioning about like other international affairs, if you know about international affairs and you're interested in covering the topic as a journalist, obviously that's very helpful and that's certainly a transferable skills. When I was in school, I worked for 311, which is the New York City call center. That's where people will call to find, whether it could be as silly as, my garbage wasn't picked up today, can I file a complaint, right? But that meant I learned a lot about New York City agencies, New York State agencies, and the federal government agencies there. And so I learned a lot about government, right? And that was like useful information for me once I became a journalist. It wasn't journalism, right? But it was a great skill to have. So that's something that's a transferable skill, right? Another job that I had was as a U.S. Census taker. So I was going door to door and asking people to, answer how they identify themselves, all those things. But I was talking to strangers all the time and going door to door. And as journalists, you do a lot of that. That is transferable skills that I learned, right? So if you have anything like that, it could have been any, part-time job or just some other career you had before that you feel that what you learned would apply and what you're interested in journalism, write about it in your cover letter, all right? Make sure you add that there. What I would say is that if it's totally left field, meaning like people will look at it on your CV, resume, and be like, why is this person putting this here? Don't put it on your resume. Just write about it on your cover letter, all right? Because your cover letter can really expand as to the connection that whatever other job or skills you picked up has to journalism. But you have to really flush it out and tell us why you even mentioned it, okay? So yes, that's useful information to include. Let me see. Actually, that would have been the last thing. So thank you for that. Any more questions? Yeah.
For your internships in the U.S., do interns only have the chance to work in DC or New York, or is it possible to work in like Chicago?
Oh, okay. So if you look at the internship posting, the U.S. internship posting is up now. That deadline is going to be November 4th. Is it 4th? Yeah, November 4th is the deadline for the U.S. because we have different staggered deadlines. Most of the internships are in New York. There are some opportunities in DC, but there are also LA, Chicago, Houston, but it depends on the beat. So you really have to look at the internship description online, and it'll tell you what location has what beats, because that will determine where it would need to be. Yeah, but it's more than just New York or DC. And for you, it would be the summer, not, we have a part-time spring internship, and that one is only open to people in New York and the DC area because we want them to go to school and work in the bureau. Yeah.
Sorry, according to what you said, if I want to apply for an internship in Asia and one of my work sample is a video, what I need to do is to transform that into a script and then translate the script into English. That's what I need to do.
Yes, in that case, if you have video in another language, yeah, and you're interested in writing, so yeah, you have the two things. You have to make it a script in English so that we can understand it, and you could still include like the video link or something like that, because there may be someone in the Asia Bureau, like I won't be looking at all of them. Usually there's someone there who will look at it, and they, depending on the bureau, et cetera, they may know the language. And so it will be easier for them. But let's say if I'm looking at it, I don't speak any Asian languages. So yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Again, it could be about the internship, journalism, a career, anything really.
So you said you opened 3 spots in Europe. That's London, Paris that you mentioned.
So the potential placement places are Brussels, London, Paris, and Berlin.
Berlin.
Yes.
You said you were working in retail? Retailing? What is it exactly?
Oh, retail. So stores like where you buy clothes and computers. That's retail. That's what we call retail.
The type of.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe you could just introduce yourself and tell where you're from and your name for her to know who's asking, maybe.
Sure. My name is Matt. I'm originally from the States. I was wondering, is there an interview process once you guys see all the dossiers? Do you guys is there an interview process, like a second step? Or?
Yes. So we do have an interview process. First is the application. We look at the application. We determine whether you meet the qualifications or you don't. Then we have a shorter list, and then we may go over it with the editors, depending on the team. And then we'll have a finalist list, and those are the people who will get contacted for an interview. And once they get interviewed, then we narrow down who we want to choose from those finalists, and then we'll make offers from there. So.
Hi, I'm Masha. I'm from Germany, and I was wondering, I know you briefly said it, but with the skill set, because the Wall Street Journal obviously is a financial journal, how helpful is it that we're all obviously at a political science university? So what kind of skill set are you looking for in that regard specifically?
The type of skill sets that we're looking for, honestly, it's going to depend on the beat, and it's also going to depend on the applicant pool. If there's someone that has more experience on a beat, we may weigh that. But if we think someone may be more talented, even though they don't have the experience, we may weigh that too. So it's going to vary a little bit case by case. That's why we say you don't have to have the experience in it. But it would be helpful if you do, it wouldn't hurt. But it just depends on also who you're running against, basically. Yeah.
And just a follow-up question, is the beat specified in the intern?
Yes. When you apply on a website, if you look at the U.S. ones that are posted now, before it would say the location and it would say what the beat options are. So whether it was markets or politics is an option, or just a world news, etc. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, I'm Kelly. I'm from the United States. Do you have any recommendations for the cover letter in terms of how to stand out, or if there's anything specific you look for when reading a cover letter?
Yeah, to stand out and making a cover letter, the biggest thing to me, honestly, when I'm looking at all these applications, is that you're following direction. In the internship description, before you apply, it says, tell us what beat you're interested in. If you don't tell me, that tells me you didn't read the directions. So that's the biggest thing, and a lot of people don't do it because it makes our decision-making process easier if we know what you're interested in and where we could potentially place you. The other thing is that you tell us more about yourself beyond the resume, things I wouldn't know from looking at it. So anything you're comfortable sharing about where you grew up or traveled or whatever it is that influenced you wanted to be a journalist, you can add that. That makes it more personal. And when we're weighing people, sometimes the personal story carries more weight depending on what it is. So it doesn't hurt to tell us more about yourself. So don't be too dry in that you're so formal repeating your resume in the cover letter. That's not what you want to do.
My name is Nancy Wong. I'm from France, and I wanted to know, do you work with freelance photographers, or do you have staff?
We do not have staff photographers, so we do work with freelancers. I know there is a network of freelancers that we do use. So if you're interested in that separately, I can find the contact, but that is a separate thing that we do. So we don't have any staff photographers, yeah. But we do have staff editors, which is photo editors, which is different. But You had a question before, right? Do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Sorry.
more, I'm Julia from France. It's more on the practical side. You said that the application was open from November to January. Is it like a first come, first served basis, or is it like, do you wait until the end of, like, until the deadline to see at all?
Oh, yeah, more than likely, it's usually at the end of the deadline. Like, when we look at it, if we're looking at it earlier than the deadline, it's because we're like people who are not meeting the qualifications. And then we'll look at who does after the deadline to be more fair. Yeah. And you had,
Thank you for Turkey. Yeah. So I was wondering, is it possible to apply for more than 1 week?
So in the cover, you should submit one application for Europe, right? And you can say in the cover letter that you're interested in more than one beat, but you need to make the cases like, which ones you're interested in. So not separate applications. No, it should be one application. So for those who may be interested in the US one, I mentioned if you qualify for Europe, obviously apply to Europe, that's fine. If you're qualified for the US, you should only be applying to one type of internship. So let's say if you're interested in the reporting one, you just apply to the reporting one. And within reporting, there's several beats. So you could say 2 or 3 beats or whatever that you're interested in, that's fine. But you can't submit an application to the reporting one and the video one and the podcast one and the, we don't want that. They all come through me anyway, so there's no need to duplicate applications. If we see someone is fit for some other type of internship, and we think that you're a great candidate, we will come back to you and say, hey, I know you applied for this, but we have this, and we think you may be the right fit because of this reason. Are you interested? And we've done that before. So there's no need to submit several applications.
My name is Mariana and I come from Portugal. I was wondering how long should the cover letter be? Like, do you want to know more than 1 page, strictly speaking? Also, is the deadline for the Europe internships also like at noon in the day of the deadline? Because I think in the US, that's how it works. And also just more of a personal question. What was the most meaningful story you felt like you worked on? Was it like one of the most well-known of your stories, or was it something that just really meant something to you and not necessarily the most known?
Okay. So let me take the first two. So in regards to what we would want as far as length for the cover letter, 1 page is fine, but we're not strict with like it has to be 1 page. I mean, if you're going into 2 pages, like you better make sure you're making it count because that means you really have a good story to tell that I want to continue reading to the 2nd page. That's what I would say. And then the second question in regards to the time of the deadline, that's a great one. So we say noon, for Europe it will be noon local London time, which I don't know, is it the same? I've been to so many different times, so I'm trying to remember. Yeah, so London time for that in that case. In the US is noon New York time. And in general, what I like to suggest is that you do not wait till the day of to apply, because what happens is sometimes there is a time zone difference or something like that, or the site may be down. Like I'm just saying, you never know. Last year, literally, I got so many emails saying like, I missed the deadline by like an hour. Can I still submit the application? No, you can't. You missed it. So try to work on like at least getting it the day before, whatever date you see in something, so that you know you made it on time.
Is it within the culture of the Wall Street Journal to have the reporters work overtime? So like, say it's a 9-to-5 job, but even the interns will be working much later than...
Oh, is it in the culture to work overtime? Yeah. We really don't encourage our interns to work overtime. They work overtime if it's needed, like news calls for it, but we're not trying to burn out our interns. That is not our goal. So we actually tell editors if interns need to work overtime, they need to let us know. So it's an approval process. And it's also not up to the intern to just work extra hours because they feel like it. There has to be a reason for it. So we do that purposely. Going back to the question that you asked me about the most I guess, memorable story, meaningful. As a journalist, honestly, sometimes it's so hard to like remember everything you've done because I've written hundreds of stories. But obviously, the two stories that were Pulitzer Prize finalists, so nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, are very special to me, right? Those are the stories that I tend to tell often, and I feel that had a great impact, right? Compared to like the other stories that I've done that probably I thought it was fun. Personally, I love the story I wrote about the Backstreet Boys fan cruises, but I'm just saying that's personally. However, like the first one when I was at Newsday, that I wrote about police brutality, and it was a part of a series that we wrote in regards to police brutality and police misconduct. To me, I was like 20 something then, and to get that kind of recognition was like, made my career like advance even further. But the story itself was very emotional, like, talking to the family and learning about what happened to the young man that I wrote about. He was 19 years old and was driving. The police tried to stop him. He ran out of the car with his friend. They chased him. He ultimately got really beat up to the point that he ended up in a coma and died a few months later. And they claimed he had a knife. They never actually found the knife, or they said they found the knife, but it was on the police cruiser dashboard, but it wasn't part of evidence because it flew off while they drove away. Like, it was like all these things that just didn't make sense. And so for me, that was like the first time where I really had to like work with the family, get court documents, get medical records, try to get people to talk to me, because at the time, the police records in New York State were essentially sealed. They could not be seen by the public. So we had to be investigative reporters to try to get that information. So I learned a lot working on that with my colleague on the investigative team. I was still covering like the town that I was covering, and I was working on that story. So that was, a good story that I learned as a journalist, but it also was during a time before the U.S. started talking even more about police brutality. So I felt like we were ahead of the wave before things happened. And then recently, the story that we worked on at the Wall Street Journal about Black Wall Street and the Tulsa race massacre in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where hundreds of people died and businesses destroyed and all these things, and what happened to the financial wealth that they created, and then all of a sudden it was destroyed and was not passed on to their descendants, right? And for me, that was particularly a meaningful project because it was mostly all the Black journalists basically at the Journal getting together and saying the 100-year, I don't want to, centennial, because it's not really an anniversary, is coming up. What can we do? And we worked on it on our own time for a while before we pitched it to the top editors in the newsroom, and they approved it. And then we were able, obviously we brought in other people in the newsroom, but for us, that was like a very grassroots type project. So to me, I was very, that was a pride of mine.
Yeah, again, another question to do with your work. I'm Pamish, come from India. I found it like this semester we're doing a lot of stories which involve us going to a small town to the outskirts of Paris and finding stories and doing on-the-ground reporting, and I've been finding that very hard. You said you spent 3 years doing that, and what was your experience like, and how did you manage doing that?
Oh, yeah, I loved it. I actually missed it when I became a business reporter, not being able to like go out in person that often. Like even as a business reporter, I tried to find ways to like go out and not just be in an office making calls and sending emails. But given that I studied and did the same thing when I was in grad school, we also had like areas of communities that we covered. I had covered East Harlem in Manhattan in New York. So I remember just going to community meetings, getting to know the community leaders, So anytime they had a meeting or an event or something that was big, I would show up there so that just people just saw my face. So when I was a town reporter, that's what I did. There was the town government, village government meetings. I would go to all of them. Sometimes there was a story that would come out of them. Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes there was something that I would write about much later. But just people seeing my face there often would have them contact me like, hey, I don't know if you know about this. And then people just naturally know to reach out to you. I also work with like the Chamber of Commerce, any business leaders as well. So it's not just government leaders or community leaders, but business leaders sometimes. They also know what's happening in the neighborhood, and just getting to know them, it gives you an idea of what's happening. And then just regular citizens will be at some of these meetings, right? So naturally they were like, oh, you covered the town. Let me tell you about what they didn't, the government didn't do. So honestly, just having FaceTime is the biggest thing. When I covered the town of Hempstead, and there were villages within the town of Hempstead that were mostly Black and Latino, and as I know I'm Afro-Latina, so I'm both. And I would go to these neighborhoods, and oftentimes they didn't encounter journalists often, right? So I was a representation for them to like see, and literally people will come up to me and give me a hug, like for being there. And I would be like, huh, like what's going on? But I understood what it meant to them to have someone cover their neighborhood and care about their neighborhood enough. So you shouldn't think about it just like, I need to get the story, but what it means for the neighborhood, like that you're doing a public service, and that's really what it's about.
It's on the same topic. You mentioned that getting a good scoop was important for a journalist. Any advice on that?
On getting scoops?
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like the advice that I just, honestly, you have to talk to people. Things will fall in your lap eventually once you do the work, and that people know to come to you. And so talking to as many people as possible helps. Like when I was covering bankruptcy, I had to do a lot of that. And so I was getting to know all the players that were involved in bankruptcy, from like the bankers to the real estate people, to any of the executives at a company, to maybe the PR people. It was like, you have to think about like who can be involved in whatever I'm writing, and you want to get to know all of them little by little. You got to make an effort. And like, this is in school, when I was in grad school, we had what we called a beat memo. So that's what you would do. Like, who are the leaders? Think about all the leaders. Who are the players, financial or such, that you should know? What are the organizations that are in that realm? Like going through that list, pretty much for any beat that you work on, it's great. Like, it's useful. Like, you know who to turn to. That's what I said when I worked for 311, knowing the city agencies, whenever a story popped up, I knew what city agency I should reach out to about something, right? So that's the type of mentality you want to have, knowing who to reach out to. And then over time, you just want to gain the trust of people, and you may not get them to talk to you and tell you something that they shouldn't right away, but having several conversations or just following up with the person, saying like, I saw this, like for example, my Backstreet Boys quirk, right? Like somebody saying like, oh, I saw that the Backstreet Boys said such and such. I saw it, and I just wanted you to know that I thought about you, or whatever. That makes you more memorable than just reaching out to someone because you need them. Yeah.
And could you, so my name is Amanda, I'm from France. Could you describe more like a typical day of an intern at the journal? Is it more like an office desk, or are we allowed to go around? Are we contributing to journalist papers, or can we pitch our own as well?
Yes, that's a great question. It's a mix of all of those things. For interns, what it's like is that they can be assigned stories by their editors, and they can pitch stories. We actually encourage interns to pitch stories because that is what's gonna make them unique. Again, we wanna know what your news judgment is like and how you think and all that, right? So what better way to do it than if you pitch your own ideas? So we want that. Doing assignments is the basic thing you can do. That is like the minimum requirement. So coming up with your ideas is essential, really, if you want to stand out. As far as whether you can go out to report or not, it depends on you and it depends on the story. Some stories you just have to do it in an office because it involves a company and you're not going to go to whatever other country to interview them. You just do it over the phone or via email. And then there's times that it requires you going out to interview people and meeting people. So that it's going to depend on what the story is, really, and how you want to cover it. Sometimes some people feel that it's mostly a desk story, but you can make an argument that you should be in the field for it. So it's up to you, really, as far as that. No routine, no, right. It depends, is what my editor used to love saying, so, yeah.
Last question. If you get chosen to be an intern, and you do a good job, like what are the chances that you actually get taken over by the journal?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what are the chances of getting hired by the journal after doing an internship? So we don't have like a certain number or anything like that because it depends. It depends on several things. One, do we have a job position open, right? So the timing of that is important. Also, did you do a great job to begin with? Can people vouch for your work? Sometimes when it's on the same team, it's a little easier to make the transition and get hired than it is to go to another team, but it happens. So last summer, a third of our interns, so that was 6 interns, got hired to a full-time job, right? One had to wait till like his last semester of school to like to finish up, but they knew they loved him in the summer. So it worked out, so he got hired. So far this summer, we were able to hire 1. She ended up being on the podcast team, but that's because some of the others we would have liked to hire got offers really quickly from other places. So they were gone, basically, but it wasn't that we wouldn't want them or anything. And they always know that the door is open to, you know, especially if they made a good impression, they can always come back. We have a lot of former interns working at the Wall Street Journal, a lot of former interns. I'm actually constantly meeting them. And I'm like, oh, you were a former intern. Interesting, because remember, I only took over the program last year. So I'm constantly like, oh, you were a former intern, you were a former intern. So people also have a soft spot for interns at the Journal. So they find ways to help them.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
I think we still have a lot of questions, but you've told us a lot of interesting stories. Show you're proud. Or
Thank you.